Okay. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. So we are live on Facebook. Today I have one-on-one interview with Christelle from New York City Human Rights Commission. So today we're going to be discussing about immigrants. One second. Today's interview is going to be about immigrants' rights in the face of discrimination and COVID-19. So we're going to engage on one-on-one about this topic. And for the benefit of our viewers, we're going to actually dive in and see what the Human Rights Commissions, what they do, and how immigrants can be protected. What are the rights of the immigrants in the face of discrimination and also with the COVID-19. So it's a pleasure to have Christelle, who is the director of social, who is the director of social worker unit and also a lead counsel for African communities, New York City Commission of Human Rights. Welcome, Christelle.
Thank you so much, Momodou. Thank you for having me.
So, Christelle, we're going to start the interview with your bio. Can you tell us something about yourself? Who are you, and what is the work that you do?
So again, sorry. Okay, so again, thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Christelle Onwu. I am, first let me say I wear many hats, but I am the director of the social work unit at the Commission on Human Rights. I am also the African Diaspora Lead Advisor, as well as I also work within the EU division of the Commission on Human Rights. I am also an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where I teach within the Africana department. And I am, originally from Cameroon, and I am, of African descent, and I am, very much into a lot of social justice issues, and I believe in ensuring that all communities that are underserved receive the resources that are needed for them to improve their living conditions.
Excellent, excellent. First, I must say that I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice from
Awesome,
2000.
that's great.
Yeah, from 2000, 1995 to 2000. So we have that in
Okay.
common. And also, I'm also, kind of into, justice for all, since it's a criminal justice school. So I also, much interested in justice. So we share that in common. All right, great. So Christelle, for the Human Rights Commission, I have seen you around so many times around African communities, try to, educate people about their rights. What are the rights that the immigrants have in this country? And this is a very hard issue because immigration is a big deal, especially for Africans like us. Many of us travel abroad and, we are citizens of other countries, but we are not treated fairly. There are certain things that we couldn't have access to. So this commission here in New York actually helped educate a lot of immigrants what is their rights. And that's how valuable your work is. So right now, I'm just gonna, ask this question. So you've been a director of social work unit and lead African community advisor at New York City Commission of Human Rights. Can you tell us about your work for the commission and what is this commission about?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. And I must also add that I actually graduated from John Jay. So going back to teach at John Jay is such a like full circle. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the New York City Commission on Human Rights prohibits discrimination in New York City. So we have 5 areas that we focus on: the areas of employment, housing, public accommodation, discriminatory harassment, as well as bias-based profiling by law enforcement. And we have more than 27 protected classes um, that we essentially focus on. And those, protected classes are, for example, you cannot face discrimination based on your age, based on your immigration or citizenship status, based on your color, disability, gender identity, marital status, national origin, pregnancy, race, and the list goes on, right? And we have one of the most comprehensive and expensive anti-discrimination law in the entire nation, right? So that's very important, to note that. And so, in order for an individual to file a claim of discrimination at the Commission on Human Rights, we essentially have a 1 year statute of limitation. But then, whenever we are, talking about cases that involve gender-based harassment, the statute of limitation is about 3 years. And so, within the Commission on Human Rights, we have a law enforcement bureau, a community relations bureau, office of the chair, as well as office of mediation. And I actually work within the community relations bureau, and our job is to educate the community, like you mentioned, right? So our job is to ensure that everyone who lives, visits New York City knows about their rights, right? Even if you're just here for 1 hour, right, or 1 minute, you have protections in New York City. And so, in terms of my work, so as the our commissioner believes that the work that we do in terms of discrimination, it is not an easy work. And so, social workers are well equipped, as well as other professions to handle this work. Right? Social workers, bring a different perspective and a different training, right? Whenever we're doing discrimination work, and so because of that, we essentially created the social work unit. And so we work in collaboration with Hunter School of Social Work, Columbia University School of Social Work, and then we just recently added a new partner at Delphi University um, School of Social Work. And so we essentially get interns every year, right, who conduct their field placement with us at the Commission on Human Rights. So we, essentially train them under my supervision, and then we also ensure that they work with our different bureaus, right, and get the skills that they need, right, to be able, to serve New Yorkers. And in terms of the position of African Diaspora Lead Advisor, that was a newly created position that did not exist. I should actually say that in the entire city of New York, the position of African Diaspora Lead Advisor is the only position, right, in all 60 agencies. We do have, other folks who are, African liaisons, but there's no, advisor for African community. And so this position was created after the 2016 elections, right, where there was a need to reach out to underserved communities. And we do know that the African community, is one of, the fastest growing immigrant community in New York City. And so there was a need to reach out to this community to make sure that their ideas, their issues are also brought to the table. And so this is how this position came to be.
Excellent, excellent. So the need that the immigrant community is growing in New York City, that kind of flag this establishment of this commission, which you represent the Africans, correct?
Yeah, so okay, so I won't say that that it created the commission per se, but it created the position of the African lead advisor, because the Commission on Human Rights has existed, for over 70 plus years, right? So, but we've never had an African diaspora lead advisor, and within the office we also have lead advisors for other communities that have been underrepresented as well.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So that being said, so how many years have you been working for this commission, and what inspired you to work for them, and what are your challenges?
So I have actually been working at the commission for almost 5 years now. Time goes by fast. Yeah, October is going to make it 5 years. And one of the reasons, why I was essentially inspired to work for the commission was because, just like you mentioned, at the top of the hour, I do believe in justice and fairness. I believe that, we all deserve to be treated fairly, right? And then that, first as human beings. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to apply for the position. And so what inspired me is was essentially the need to fill out the gap in the representation of Africans, right? As I went into different meetings, as I went into different spaces in government, it was hard for me to see other African legal advisors, right, within this position. Oftentimes, finding yourself in in spaces where you're the only one, right? And so also realizing that the African community, was not always, spoken, spoken of, and so that essentially, encouraged me to change the narrative of our stories. I remember, putting together the first African forum in the Bronx around 149th Street, and telling myself that I wanted it to be, in a space that reflects, what the African community is all about. And so it was actually, one of, the first times that Italy agency had put such, an amazing forum together, and we had about 100 people in attendance, right? And then we had over 20 city agencies who came in because they were also trying to reach out to the African diaspora. And so, so after that event, the interest grew, and the mayor also recognizing that there's a need to have underrepresented communities essentially supported this position, as well as our commissioner. So I wouldn't be here but for for the interest of the administration to ensure that communities that have been underserved are at the table. And so in terms of challenges, I would say just like any other work, it is oftentimes difficult to ensure that we have everyone at the table. We know that Africa is a continent, right, with now 55 different nations.
Right.
And so I've always, tried as much as I can to ensure that yes, we know that that there is a large West African community in New York City, but we also know that we also have our brothers and sisters, from the east, right, from the north, from the south. So we need to also cater to them. And so I have, try, to the best of my ability to ensure that everyone is represented, in some way, somehow. And then that, we're not just focusing, on the West African community. So I would say, that has been, one of my challenges, but I hope, that I have tried my best, and I will continue to try my best, to ensure that, every voice is at the table.
So you must be very pretty busy if you have to get in contact with all these Africans, especially in New York. I work with African Day Parade, so I know how many African countries are
Mm.
here. Organizing the parade, I know how many, organizations I have to contact. So you will have definitely a very busy schedule. Try to, organize events, try to send, these people sensitization and making sure that the commission is here and then they are well represented, correct?
Yes, I mean it is a lot of work, and oftentimes, it can be overwhelming, but I love doing it because I think, that there's so much, value in ensuring that our voice is at the table, right? Because we do contribute a lot, right? To making New York City the beautiful city that it is. And I've also been very lucky because I've had partners, right? Who are interested, in reaching out to government. Like, we do know that most Africans don't trust government, and so when I first started doing this work, the first thing that I needed to do was get the confidence of the community and the trust of the community. And I believe that being a social worker by training, and having those interpersonal skills were very beneficial. In going to the community, even though I am of Cameroonian descent. Most people never knew that I was from Cameroon because I went in like without that identity, because my main goal was to bridge the gap, and
Right.
get the Africans to believe that yes, on the continent, we government might not work for us, but in New York City, government works for you, right? So you have to hold government accountable, and we are public servants and we work for you. So you have to tell us what are your needs, what are your wants, and we'll figure out, how best to serve you.
Very good. So you mentioned something that is different when it comes to Africa and here. You said that in New York City here, you have to hold the government accountable. Unlike Africa, you cannot hold the government accountable because there is probably not any laws or there is not, any opportunity to do so. So how do you hold the government accountable here? Do we have to kind of, we put petitions? Do you have to go to the offices and then, claim things that you think belongs to the community and so forth? How do you go about knowing, having the government, holding the government accountable?
That is an excellent question. And I'm not sure if I have the answer, but I will try to answer it. I wouldn't say, like go, like going to the, to the government to hold them accountable, but I would say, for example, having this conversation like we are, right? This is why we put together forums. This is why, we put together meetings so we can hear from the leaders. We can, have town halls to listen in, and hear some of the issues, right, that the communities are faced with, and then take it back to the appropriate agencies to ensure that we essentially resolving it. I will give you an example. Sometimes, at the beginning of this year, some African community leaders reach out because one of a tenant who identifies as being of African descent from Senegal was having issues with her landlord, right? There were like issues of harassment, and so though we like the Commission on Human Rights, we do focus on discrimination. This specific individual was not willing at the time, right, to file a complaint, and so what we did was connect them with our colleagues at the mayor's office to protect tenants, as well as HRA, and the mayor's office of Immigrant Affairs, to see how we can provide her with all the resources that she might need. So she was looking, to move out of her current apartment. And so because we can do that, so we reach out, to like HPD as well as the mayor's office to protect tenants, right? So we're able to be that, that bridge, right, in assisting her in resolving the issue that she had. And so based on that specific incident, right, we were able to put together a fair housing forum back in April, right, which was actually conducted in French, but it was simultaneously, where we brought in some of those same agencies to come in, and essentially share resources and services to the communities, so that they know what to do, in case anyone is faced with such situations when interacting with their landlord. So that's just a perfect example as to how you can essentially advocate for your community.
Okay, perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, so moving along, now that our topic is about immigration rights, the rights in the face of discrimination, immigrants' rights in the face of discrimination. What kind of discrimination would the immigrants face here in New York City or elsewhere, and how could this discrimination be mitigated?
Yeah, so essentially, all New Yorkers, as we know, deserve fairness and respect in the workplace and when looking for or renting an apartment. So if you're treated differently, let's say by your employer or your landlord, because of what country you come from, if you have a beautiful accent like me, right, because of your religious beliefs, right, it's very important, to call 311. Actually, Momodou, you are on mute. So you can just
Yeah.
call, 311, no problem. You can call 311 and say human rights, right? So employers cannot pay workers lower wages or no wages because of their immigration status, right? So if someone hires you, they can decide to pay you lower, like a lower wages or no wages at all because of immigration status. They can make fun of workers because of their national origins, religious belief, or attire, right? As well as your accent or your immigration status. They cannot punish workers for speaking their own language, right? So you cannot be punished because you're speaking your own language at work. They can threaten workers, about calling the police because of the immigration status. They can refuse to hire someone because of because of the nationality, religious belief, attire, or accent. Now, when it comes to housing, landlords cannot refuse to rent an apartment because of someone's immigration status, nationality, or religious belief. They can post advertisement, right, stating I only want, tenants from Ghana, right? I only want, individuals who have green card, who are green card holders, right? Or people from certain, countries, right? That is against the law in New York City. They can also fail to make adequate repairs, right? So this is, I think one of the complaints that we get a lot from the African communities, right? Landlords refusing to make repairs in certain, apartments, but making repairs in other apartments, right? That is all against the law. And so we do ask, African, immigrants to reach out to us, by just calling 311 and say human rights, and if you don't speak English, that is okay, right? At the commission, we speak over 30 languages, so you can definitely reach out to us, and we'll be sure to be, of assistance.
All right. So you mentioned about housing and and the employment and so forth. Now, is it that the some of these immigrants are you know been been denied because of their where they're from, or because of their accents or something like, or because of their reputation or being known of something? How are these what is the driving force for this discrimination? Do you have an idea, especially when it comes to Africans?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, earlier, like people can face discrimination for different reasons, right? So it can be, because of your race, it can be because of your color, it can be because of your national origin, your lawful source of income, it can be because you have children, it can be because of your marital status, it can be, because you are a victim or survivor of domestic violence, right? So all of these reasons, might be, determinant, as to why individuals might be, discriminated against either in employment or housing. But having, done this work for a couple of years now, I know, most of the time, some of the cases that, at least, I've received, have been as a result of, landlords refusing to make repairs, employers, refusing to accommodate, individuals, based on their religious beliefs, right? So, individuals, who would like to pray, 5 times a day, employers saying, well, I'm not going to provide you with that accommodation, right? Domestic violence survivor, right? Being refused, apartments, right, because of their status, right? So those are just, oh, and then also children in the home. That's the most common one, right? Landlords refusing to rent apartment because someone has little children, right? I remember when I first started early on, I had a case where an African woman, was going through, some challenges in her apartment because the super kept turning on and off, the hot water, because the children were making too much noise, right, in the apartment, right? And so she had reached out to us, right? So those are just a few examples. We also do have protections when it comes to pregnancy, right, in the workplace, right? So if an individual, is pregnant, and they can essentially request for accommodation, right? So reasonable accommodation, right? So if you work in a store and you have to stand on your feet for 8 hours because of your pregnancy, you can ask, for a chair. You can ask for bathroom breaks, right? And so the great thing about the law is that you don't need to provide a doctor's note to prove that you're pregnant, right? You can just have a conversation with your employer regarding that, right? And so those are just, some of the few protections that we have. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Another thing that I was gonna ask, is that the commission is divided into two. You have the law enforcement and then the community relation. Can you explain these two things, and then what each commission is focused on, and what are you focused on most of the time?
Yeah, sure. So, uh,
I cannot hear you.
okay, yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so actually, the commission has 4 different, departments. So we do have the Community Relations Bureau, the Law Enforcement Bureau, the Office of the Chairperson, and the in the Office of Mediation and Conflict Resolution. But to your question, the Law Enforcement Bureau is made up of our attorneys, right? So we have our lawyers who work within the Law Enforcement Bureau, right? So whenever individuals call that 311 number and and they speak to someone within the law enforcement bureau, but then what we call the info line, right? So they will make an appointment depending on whether or not their claim is a discriminatory claim, right? So they will be given an appointment to meet with one of our attorney. The attorneys within our law enforcement bureau, they actually investigate allegations of discrimination, right? So they investigate them, they file a complaint, right? On behalf of New Yorkers, right? And it's also they also provide like service provider, community organization, elected officials, right? Can also bring potential discrimination claims to our law enforcement bureau, and then they will essentially initiate those investigation. And so again, like I mentioned earlier, for you to report a claim of discrimination, you will have to essentially call 311, right? And then you're going to be linked up with one of our attorney if your claim meets our threshold. Now with the Community Relations Bureau, so we do have Community Relations Bureau in all five boroughs, so in Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, the Bronx, and so we call them community service center. So prior to COVID, right, New Yorkers were able to walk into our centers, right, and file a claim of discrimination. Um, and right now, the city has reopened, right, so some of our colleagues have been able to go back, but we do still ask New Yorkers to call that number to make an appointment in order to file a claim, or just call the 311 number. So within the Community Relations Bureau, which is the bureau that I work in, our main goal is to put together forum. We provide direct service by educating the public about the protections, the obligations that are under the law. We also engage in pre-complaint intervention, right? And then we bring communities together, right? We conduct workshop, and we want to make sure that individuals have a better understanding of the human rights law, and they also understand what their rights are. Within that Community Relations Bureau, we have what we call the bias response team, right? So whenever we have incidents, of bias, right, we have seen an increase in anti-Asian incidents, right,
Right,
over
right.
the last couple of months, right? So our bias response team, has been involved with that. We also have a discriminatory harassment investigator, right, who essentially investigates some of these crimes, and also keeps track of the numbers. We have a Project Equal Access team that is now located within the Law Enforcement Bureau, but was previously located within the Community Relations Bureau. And their job is essentially to go into again, this was pre-COVID, go into New Yorkers' homes. Let's say for example that someone God forbid is now in a wheelchair and they are not able to climb upstairs, right, in the building,
Right.
right? So they will have to request that the landlord provide a ramp, right, to allow the individual to have easy access, right, to their apartment. That is the work of our Project Equal Access. We have a Reentry and Fair Chance Act, right? So just essentially individuals who work in our prison system, right? So at Rikers Island, we provide workshops there, right? As well, we have liaison for fair housing. We have LGBTQ advisor. We have youth advisors, right? So we have so many different programs that we essentially have within the Community Relations Bureau. And again, our mandate is to ensure that every community, especially the ones right who have not been acknowledged by government, is represented.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned something about equal access, especially for people who are disabled, and also fair housing. making sure that the minorities are equally represented when they apply for housing, and also people who are in wheelchairs who need access to things that otherwise would be difficult to access. So your commission basically provide protection for those. They have legal teams that works on that and make sure that everybody's rights is served. And if a business or an organization kind of comes in between those lines where they prevent people from having equal access, especially to places like banks. They don't have right tools in place for people with wheelchairs to go and do their banking transaction. They can be fined and so forth. So your commission kind of like look like a police, making sure that those laws are followed. Is that a correct statement?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say like the police per se, but we do have law enforcement powers, right? And so yes, if like I said earlier, right, if an individual has issues accessing, their apartment, we can provide reasonable accommodation, right? So people with disabilities, right, we know are also entitled to reasonable accommodation, right? That can be changes to a building or space that do not cause, again, the keyword is undue hardship to the business, employer, or housing provider. So examples of reasonable accommodations would be, let's say, for example, someone, like I mentioned, needing a ramp, either interior, exterior, someone needing, to have electronic doors, grab bars or run rails, right, assistive listening devices, or also, just, someone needing to have, a service animal in the building, right, especially buildings that say, well, no pets allowed, right? But if someone needs a service animal, right, and has a disability, right, the landlord should provide that exception, right, to the no pets allowed policy, right. And so if the landlord refuses, let's say for example, to provide the accommodation, right, the individual can reach out to us, right, and then a member of our Project Equal Access team, is going to reach out to them to get a better understanding of the situation, right? And also ask them, if they have made a request to the landlord. So it's important again for tenants to have a conversation with the landlords first, right? And then, if the tenant says, well, yes, I reached out to my landlord, and the landlord, denied the accommodation, right? Then our Project Equal Access team is going to conduct, what we call a public survey, right, to access what accommodation is possible, right, using the guidelines that are given by the Americans with Disability Act, right, so the ADA, right.
ADA.
So now, if the Project Equal Access team determines that an accommodation is possible, then they're going to contact the landlord or the building manager and advise them, right, that under the human rights law, they will recommend that the landlord provides an accommodation, and so they're going to start having negotiations, right, just to make sure that that takes place. Oftentimes the landlord might say, no, I don't have the money to do that, right, and so in that case, they will have to essentially prove to the commission, right, that they don't have enough money, so we can request for their financial statements, right, to ensure that they actually do not have enough money to provide the accommodation.
Okay. So, in essence, you guys would find a way if the landlord disagrees to make these adjustments.
So I won't say find a way. Again, everything is based on the facts, right? So we have to look at the facts. We have to look at what the landlord has stated, right? And so well, most landlords might say, well, we don't have enough money, we don't have, we're not able to make the accommodation. Then you ask them to provide us with their financial statements, right, just to back up
They are,
that argument.
yeah. So, in case that their argument stands, what do you do? Do you with this person? I mean, what is the next step?
So it's again, next step is we move it to our lawyers, because unfortunately I'm not a lawyer. So I'm just a social worker. So our lawyers, our attorneys within the law enforcement bureau, right, we take
The
the
case.
next step. Yes.
Okay. So, do you have lawyers that would actually look and see what is the next step? Okay, good.
Yes.
Now, I work in real estate industry, and then I noticed that sometimes when tenants comes, I mean, like a vacancy is in place. I read about the fact that if there's a room to rent or apartment, it must be advertised and fairly and squarely. And people who are coming there to apply should not be, the landlord shouldn't come and say, oh, I want only Africans, or I want only Asians, or I want I don't want somebody who look like this, or I don't want African Americans here. So if your landlord comes and have this mindset that he would only rent this to a particular group of people, and then this is known to the person who came, like I came there, and the landlord actually said, I will never rent this place to an African, and I happen to hear that. What is the action and that from your group, your organization?
So you should be reaching out to us because that is discrimination, right? You can't say, well, I'm not going to rent, to you because you're African, or because you have an accent, or because you have children, or because you have a specific voucher, right? Some landlords will say, I don't want Section 8 vouchers, right? I don't want FEBS vouchers. I don't want link vouchers, So that's against the law, in New York City, right? So yeah, that's discrimination, and then landlords should not be saying that. All real estate agents are super, right? Because they can all be held liable for discrimination.
Okay. Now, another thing. I mean, I know we have 10 minutes to go. I'm just trying to summarize this. As Africans, we are mostly discriminated, especially at employment. Sometimes we get, and not only Africans, but as well as blacks, we can be in the same level with someone who is non-African, who is white, and oftentimes we will see, the treatments at employment, and also sometimes even the pay. You can be doing the same job with someone of a different nationality, and then they end up getting paid higher, better than you. So I've seen that when I was working in, I'm not going to mention the organization's name, but I happened to decipher the HR, pay system, and somebody who was hired before me, and I've been there 3 years, was making more money than me. So how do you guys guide, people of color or Africans or immigrants in those kind of circumstances when they feel like they are being discriminated at the workplace? Either, they compare pay with their counterpart, or the way they are treated, given perhaps most of the work, and so forth. How do you have circumstances like that, or do you have advices for people?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry that that happened to you. But it is important, for everyone
That's
listening
fine,
and for
because I,
everyone.
I have a thick skin, so I wouldn't. I mean, it never really bothered me, but I have seen
Yeah,
that happen. And then my only concern was when I find out about that, I started looking for another job, because I
yeah,
know that,
yeah.
like something unfair has happened to me. So, but go ahead.
It's happened to you. Yeah, yeah. But I want everyone to know that, again, asking about salary history during the hiring process is illegal in New York City, right? So that was a new law. Well, it's not new anymore because the law took effect on October 31st, 2017, right? So now we're in 2021, right? So it became illegal for public and private employers of any size in New York City to ask about an applicant history during the hiring process. Right? This includes an advertisement for positions, on applications, or an interview. Right? And so that was just, one of the reasons, right, to just, prevent what you just mentioned, right? To have situations, where, we know that, a lot of black and brown folks, oftentimes, have, difficulties, like receiving the amount of pay, that they deserve based on their qualifications, right? And so this law, was created to essentially, avoid that, right? And also the one thing that I often tell, especially the African community or black and brown folks is that when you're going for interview, please do not volunteer your salary history. Or don't tell them how much you were making, unless obviously they're not supposed to ask you that question at all. Because oftentimes, when you volunteer that information, then they can use it against you, right? So it is important to let everyone know that that is now a law in New York City. It has been, since 2017, that you cannot be asked by an employer how much were you making in your old job, and they cannot look for that information as well. And so that is ways to way to which we can mitigate the pay equity and the pay gap that exists in New York City. And again, to report an act of discrimination, whether you've witnessed it, or whether you're a victim, is to call either 311 and say human rights, or you can call 212 416 Again, 212 416 right? And you'll be able to speak with a member of our team.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Very good. So that being said, again, we have a few minutes to go, but I'm just gonna illustrate on this a little more. Uh, Discrimination, and then especially in the face of COVID. COVID has hit, you know, the whole world, and people were laid off, businesses were closed, some people hours have been cut, and so forth. What were some of the things that people need to know when it comes to COVID, to feel that like they're not getting the opportunities that they are out there, that they are not getting, getting to, or they haven't been exposed to, or what are the some of the discriminations that they could face during this COVID? Because we are almost at the ending phase, but still COVID is around. So perhaps this will be a beneficial, you know, question for for people who still wanna get some benefits from COVID. And I know there are a lot of fundings for COVID. I've seen, people have been given money not only from the state, from the federal, but also even food supplies. Um, a lot of the city has been given, free food to, people out there and so forth. So, but what are some of the things that people can need to monitor in terms of discrimination when it comes to COVID?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, and thank you again for the opportunity to share this information. So no, we do know that the numbers have gone really down, and we're so grateful, to all of our healthcare worker, our elected officials, and everyone else who has worked so hard, to ensure that New York City is not where it used to be, back in 2020, of March. But I do, want to share that, again, um, the Commission considers actual or perceived infection with COVID-19 to be protected as a disability, right? So we use that as a disability under the human rights law. So essentially, employers cannot discriminate against or harass employees with actual or perceived infections with COVID-19, right? And this is based on an actual or perceived history of such infection, right? So it's illegal for an employer, right, to discriminate against an employee, based of a presumption that they have contacted COVID or are likely to contact COVID, right? And this is based on either the actual race, religion, national origin, disability, right, or their perceived race, national origin, religion, or disability, right? So the Commission has put into place, an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's guidance, right, which was originally published. It's called the Pandemic Preparedness in the Workplace and the American with Disabilities Act. It was originally published on October 9th, 2009, and it was reissued on March 21st, 2020, right? And so, this is essentially in compliance with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's guidance, right, which essentially, states that, right, New Yorkers, that since we're in New York, like New Yorkers have protections, right, in their workplace, right, as it relates, to COVID. I know that at the very beginning, um of COVID, like we've had a lot of complaints, in employment, from like community members regarding taking the test, taking the COVID test, right? And so we had encouraged members, right, to reach out. And then something else that the commission actually did during this Ramadan was to issue best practices, right, for our brothers and sisters during Ramadan, who were going to take COVID-19, vaccine, right? And so, so far, we did not hear, any complaints, So I know I'm going to make an assumption that the best practices, was really helpful, right? So we do continue to encourage community members to reach out to us, if they, face any sort of, discrimination or anything, that makes them feel uncomfortable. Sometimes you might not even be sure, right? And you might not even been aware that you're going through discrimination. So sometimes it's just great to just reach out. You can reach out to your community member, right? You can reach out, to your imam, to your pastor, right? Just to make sure that, what you're going through is not discrimination. Because sometimes discrimination, can be very subtle, right? And sometimes individuals might not even know they're going to discrimination. So just please reach out if you have any questions, right? And we can definitely guide you through that process.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. So for the benefit of those watching, we just want to let everybody knows that discrimination exists, especially for the immigrants. If you come to a foreign country, of course, you're trying to make the best living over there, and then take opportunities of things that are available, especially if you are documented. But even if you are not documented, places like here in New York City, where they have undocumented immigrants, there are some rights that they are eligible for, and those things need to be known so that ordinary people wouldn't take advantage of these folks, and of course law enforcement wouldn't have to take advantage of them. So that's why we have this commission here, and Christelle have been very forefront of this to make sure that everyone is sensitized, at least in African community, about their rights. So you cannot just be evicted, like that. There are access to, to the courthouse that you have to go and then seek legal assistance. I've seen people who have been having issues with their rent payments, and they have to go to court, and then the judge would have to evaluate their conditions and so forth. So the landlord will have to give them payment plans and so forth, and get some assistance somewhere. So all those rights are there. If you don't know it as an immigrant, you come, somebody, throw you out. Perhaps, they're doing you wrong. I mean, that's why this commission has empowered immigrants with basic rights, fair housing, employment and so forth. And they have legal teams too that can, look into cases like this, and then, fight for your rights to make sure that perhaps some of the injustice wouldn't happen to you. So it's very good to have this kind of discussion, as we have a lot of immigrants from Africa all over the world, not only in New York City or in America. So this is a great discussion, Crystal, and I'm glad to have you on our global discussion on New Gambia platform. We have a discussion on Gambia and other places tomorrow, Sunday. But we start this program to invite other viewpoints from other localities or other areas beside beyond Gambia. So I'm glad to have you here, and I would like to hear your final thoughts as we are on top of the hour. What is your advice generally to brothers and sisters of immigrants, and and then we will definitely would want to see you next time. Your final thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share all the amazing work, that the city of New York, has done to ensure that our communities are at the table, and then that the concerns of our communities, are put, in the front, and center of this administration. It is very, essential, to have an administration that believes, in uplifting the voices of the underserved, the voices of those who are not at the table. It's been, an amazing pleasure, right, to work, as an African diaspora lead advisor. It's been, I've learned so much about, the continent. I've learned so much about people. We are very resilient, we, understand the sense of community, and everywhere that we go, we are, going to excel. And so, my advice, to newly arrived immigrants who have been here before, it's important, right, to have celebrations, but it's also important for us to educate ourselves, because, as a newly arrived immigrant, you need to understand the laws of a nation. where you're going to be residing in. If you don't understand the laws of nations, then you can make mistakes, and those mistakes can be very costly. So when you also understand what your rights are, right, so other people will not take advantage of you, right, regardless of whether you have an accent or not, it doesn't matter. Regardless of whether you're here for 1 minute or 1 hour, you need to understand what your rights are and also educate others, right? Let's continue, to have this sort of conversations. Let's continue to share information. I mean, this is very cliche. They always say, that knowledge is power, but knowledge is literally very powerful, right? Because I remember, as a newly arrived immigrant, the one thing that I wanted to know was what can I do so I won't get in trouble, right? It can be so simple. But I was like, I need to know this. And so going to John Jay College, was my way of saying I need to know the laws, because when I don't know the laws, people cannot take advantage of me. And I've seen, how so many immigrants have been taken advantage of, in different, areas, of the city, in the educational system, in the healthcare, field, right? In a place of work. So it's so important for us to know our rights. And also, you need to understand that it's important to have mentors, right? Have mentors, and also where you get your information is very crucial. People who can guide you through the process, right? And also being very mindful, of fake news. Let's read information, and get accurate information. Double check your sources, right? Because oftentimes, we can, spread out misinformation, and create panic within our communities. We need to know who our sources are, right? And make sure that our sources, are credible. So, that's one thing that I'm going to leave with you with. But again, if you face discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodation, please do reach out to us, right? Simple. Just say 311 and say human rights, and you'll be connected to us, and we speak different languages. And again, we work for you, right? And so you have to hold us accountable, and we're here to serve you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And that being said, you have some comments, but they're just saying hi to us. So since this is a first of this kind, I would just say thank you so much, Christelle, and keep up the good work for the African community, for the immigrant community, and we're so proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Have a good
Okay.
evening.
All right. Until next time. Take care. Thank you.